Ever since the beginning of thought itself, we have always looked to the horizon, looked around us, or looked within, and asked the questions of what might have been, what is, and what could be. These questions were the very roots of the ancient art of stories, the foundation upon which infinite universes are conceived. I am Indigo Steel, multiversal Magitech mage. I have seen things astonishing, terrifying, and wondrous among the endless infinities of the cosmos, and I invite you to listen as I reveal to you the existence of legendary worlds. Hello friends, please make yourselves comfortable. I always appreciate the gift of your precious time. I have heard rumored that there is a particular story that many would very much like to have told. Behold, my friends, your desire granted. I found this great tale in universe ZSG-8124, which also crosses into the PD system, number 82025 to be precise. It is a story of a young princess who loses her family before being locked away in a supposedly cursed tower meant to break her spirit for a later time when she is to be used as an accessory to the power of others. But the princess soon discovers that this solitary place is not a prison, but a sanctuary for a once powerful wizard who also weathered great tragedy at the hands of those who sought power and wealth by force, only to become something far greater. The princess, too, shall find a greater version of herself in this tower, and become something legendary in the process. On the night her kingdom died, Princess Rosalia did not scream. She would come to remember that afterward more clearly than she remembered the blood. She remembered the red banners of Varethus climbing the white walls of her father's keep like fire taking to old paper. She remembered the bells sounding too long, then stopping all at once. She remembered her mother's hands gripping her shoulders hard enough to hurt, and her father's voice, usually warm, usually patient, becoming a soldier's voice. "Go with Sir Garin," he had said, to which Sir Garin bowed. General Garin Vale, commander of the royal armies, defender of the crown, beloved by the people. Traitor. He had wrapped a dark cloak around her before rushing her through servants' corridors and postern gates, and all the while Rosalia, 14, frightened, and not yet wise enough to smell treachery beneath polished words, had believed that she was being saved. It was only when she realized where the horses were going that she began to understand. They were not headed toward the western hills where loyalists might still gather, but instead northward, into the black pine forests and broken crags that remained wild and dangerous. "Where are we going?" she had asked, voice thin with cold. "To safety," Garin had said. There was a silence between them in which only hoofbeats spoke. Rosalia considered riding off the beaten path and taking her chances in the wilderness, but she feared the unknown, and perhaps some small part of her still wanted to trust a man she'd known and trusted all her life. Garin, as if sensing her intentions, would add, "You should be grateful, Highness. Had I left you in the capital, you would already be dead." By dawn, they reached the tower at last. It stood alone atop a jagged rise of stone, older than memory, perhaps even older than the kingdom of Aurelian itself. No ivy climbed it, no birds perched upon it, and the gray blocks seemed to drink the morning light rather than reflect it. The villagers in the valleys below called it Blackglass Tower, though Rosalia didn't know why, as it was made of stone, not glass. It was only one of the stories she'd heard of this place. They also said a curse lay upon it, that those who entered with greed in their hearts went mad at its halls. Thieves were found torn apart at its gates. 3 would-be lords once tried to seize its rumored treasures, and only one crawled back, blind and screaming, clawing at his own face and begging forgiveness from someone who was not there. Garin dismounted and hauled Rosalia down beside him. She stared up at the tower and felt, for the first time since fleeing the palace, true fear. "No," she whispered. "No, please." The general's face was grave, almost gentle. That, more than anything, made her hate him later. Cruelty was easier to understand than this imitation of mercy.
"You are the last living child of King Aldrich," he said. "That makes you useful."
He paced before her as if delivering a report to court.
"The realm has fallen. Your parents are dead. The old line is ended in all but you. King Malric of Verethus has agreed to preserve your life on one condition. When his son, Prince Hadrian, ascends to the throne, you will wed him. Your claim will legitimize his rule over Aurelion."
Rosalia stared, defiant.
"I would never!"
Garon crouched to her level.
"At 14, your consent matters to no one."
She slapped him. For an instant, something real flashed in his eyes. Anger, perhaps, shame, but it was gone at once. He stood.
"If the tower kills you, then all of this becomes simpler. If it does not, then perhaps destiny still has use for you."
He drew a key from his coat, iron, black, and ancient, and opened the tower door. The darkness inside breathed cold air onto her face.
"She is to remain here," he told the guards. "Food will be delivered at the lower gate once a month. None are to enter. If she does, we report that the curse took her. If she lives, we return when she is of age."
Rosalia tried to run, only for Garon to catch her by the wrist so hard she cried out. He then pulled her close and said in a low, threatening tone only she could hear,
"Pray the stories are false, child. Prince Hadrian is less merciful than I am."
He shoved her through the doorway then, the door booming shut behind her. By the time Rosalia scrambled back to it, striking it with both fists, screaming until her throat turned raw, she heard bolts slide into place outside. Then, silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of abandonment. The first week, she could only grieve. The second, she struggled with terror. By the third week, there was hunger, anger, and the slow understanding that no rescue was coming. Bizarrely, Blackglass Tower seemed larger inside than it seemed from without. Narrow staircases wound through 7 levels. Dust lay thick on most floors, but not so thick as to hide the shapes of long use. Work tables, shelves, furnaces, brass instruments, racks of vials and crystal rods. It was not a prison built as a prison. It was a home, a workshop, a scholar's refuge, a wizard's abode. That much the old tales had said was true. Rosalia found the bedchambers sparse, but not joyless. There was a kitchen, where preserved stores had long ago spoiled to uselessness. She found an observatory beneath a domed roof of dark crystal, and, below all of it, a locked chamber she could not yet open. She also found bones. Not many, just 3 sets, scattered near the lower halls. One had died clutching a dagger, another lay half across the threshold of a library as though fleeing, and there was one that was naught but a skull and a hand beside the front stair. So the curse then, she confirmed in her perception, was real. It was by the 4th week that she began to hear the tower itself. Not voices, not at first, but motions. Clicks of unseen mechanisms in the walls, whispers of air where there should have been none, and once a rush of blue fire along runes hidden between the stones when she touched a sealed door. And yet, nothing harmed her, not even once. On the 33rd day, when despair sat heavy enough in her chest to feel like a second heart, she found the orb. It rested on a pedestal in the observatory, covered by a black cloth she could have sworn had not been there before. She was reasonably hesitant. Outside, the world was dying without her, and inside she had spoken aloud for so long with no answer that she'd begun to fear her own voice, or at least feared hearing her voice as another's due to fracturing sanity. Steeling herself, she pulled the cloth away. The orb beneath was clear as frozen water. Light stirred inside it, pale gold at first, then brighter. The air thickened. The tower gave a long, low hum, like a breath released after years of waiting. A figure appeared within the crystal. An old man, thin and severe at first glance, though the severity was born of sorrow, not malice. He was handsome in the distinguished way men tended to be in the wisdom and acceptance of advanced age, hair falling silver to his shoulders, full beard of silver flowing to his chest. His robes were plain. His eyes were kind in the way of people who have suffered enough to recognize suffering in others immediately. He looked directly at her.
"If you can see this," he said, "then you have entered Blackglass Tower with a heart not ruled by cruelty, greed, or malice."
Roselia froze. The image smiled, sadly.
"Good. Then perhaps my precautions have not been in vain."
He bowed his head.
"My name was Corvin Thale. Some called me wizard, some called me hermit, some, I suspect, called me mad. I was none of these things entirely, though perhaps little of each."
The projection shifted, showing glimpses as he spoke. A younger Corvin beside a beautiful, laughing woman and two small children, a boy and a girl. The scene of happiness turned to one of tragedy, a well-built farmhouse burning under night skies, and 3 bodies shrouded in linen. Roselia's breath caught.
"I once had a family," Corvin said. "I loved them more than scholarship, more than reputation, more than life itself. I loved them more than scholarship, more than reputation, more than life itself. They were taken from me by men who believed power gave them permission to destroy what they could not possess."
The image stilled.
"For a time, I wished only to follow them into death."
Roselia stepped closer.
"But grief," he continued, "can hollow a person to a tomb, or carve them into something larger. I chose imperfectly and painfully to live. I withdrew here. I studied, I built, I delved deeper than I ever had before into the old sciences of alchemy, the exacting beauty of artifice, the deep laws of magic, by which the world may be persuaded to change itself."
She listened without moving, hanging on to Corvin's every word.
"I did not go wholly absent from the world. I descended at times to nearby villages for supplies. I used the unending love for my family to fuel my compassion for others, even though that same compassion was not extended to me. I chose not to blame all for the actions of some. I gave coin where I found the need for it. I crafted toys to make children happy. I formulated medicine to heal the sick and infirm. Quiet helped mostly, as I felt quiet seemed kinder."
His face softened.
"If you found this message, then perhaps you too have known loss. If so, know that I grieve for you, though I know not your name. I feel for you, though I know not your past. I love you, though I know not your heart."
Tears spilled down Roselia's cheeks before she knew they had begun. The wizard's projection looked, impossibly, almost as if he could see them.
"This tower most likely feels to you as if it is a lonely and bloodthirsty place. I assure you, in truth, it is a bastion of safety and solitude," he said. "It is not cursed, but guarded. Those who came with violence simply awakened what I designed to resist violence. The tower judges intention poorly sometimes, but never wholly wrongly. Better a cruel man die at the threshold than innocents perish for lack of defense."
On those last words, his eyes closed briefly, as if that particular wisdom was earned at great cost. Corvin's eyes opened once more, and the orb brightened. Symbols bloomed around it in rings of gold.
"Listen carefully. Beneath the observatory is a hidden stair. Speak the word Sarath, and the northern wall will open. Below you will find my laboratories, vaults, and library. The keys are keyed not to blood, but to conduct. Treat this place as a sanctuary of study, and it will serve you. Seek only domination, and it may kill you."
Roselia swallowed and whispered, "Sarath." Stone ground against stone somewhere behind her. Corvin went on.
"There are books enough to educate 10 universities, instruments to build wonders or terrors, and notes recording both my successes and failures. Learn first patience, then humility, then rigor. Power without discipline is a plague."
for the first time a faint smile touched his mouth. "And whoever you are, lonely child, grieving stranger, or old soul wandering where the world drove you, I wish you life, love, and all that comes with them, even the challenges, as challenges are meant to be overcome, and to help us grow and be something better." The light began to dim. One last instruction. Do not surrender your heart to vengeance without asking what it will cost you. Justice is necessary. Wrath is seductive. Please know the difference. At his final heartfelt word, "Goodbye," Corwin's image faded away. The observatory fell silent again. Roselia stood alone before the crystal orb, crying like someone who had at last been seen. Then she turned to the northern wall and began. The years in Blackglass Tower remade her. At first she learned because she had no other weapon or option to pass the time. Then she learned because the process gave structure to grief. Eventually she learned because she discovered she loved it so, and knowing the wonders of magic stoked the first embers of happiness she'd felt since her world was first ripped away from her. Corvin had not exaggerated. The hidden levels beneath the tower were a kingdom of knowledge, buried in stone. The tower seemingly built as far below as it was above. Shelves of grimoires and histories, codices on natural philosophy, alchemical ledgers, diagrams of enchanted engines and warding lattices, chests of star metal tools, sealed gardens lit by glowing magic lamps, where rare herbs still grew beneath protective charms. She would also come to realize, or at least reason to herself, that she was not truly alone. The tower itself seemed to become a silent tutor of sorts. If she grew impatient and mishandled volatile compounds, brass arms extended from the walls to snatch the vessel away before it exploded in her face, before promptly rapping her on the knuckles with a flat wooden shim, just enough to leave a gentle sting that reinforced the fact of her error. Conversely, if she solved a warding puzzle correctly, doors unlocked in quiet approval, and if she wept too long and neglected food, the kitchen hearth would kindle itself, and pans would clatter until she descended. It was not affection per se, but it was care. She cut her hair with laboratory shears when it became too long, bathed and groomed in bases of magically heated water, and mended her own clothes until she could eventually craft full garments in threads strengthened with minor spells. She mapped every chamber, learned every draft and echo. Monthly provisions appeared at the tower gate as promised: grain, salted meat, candles, soap, sometimes fruit and vegetables already bruising by the time she brought them in. But she came to rely on them less as she mastered preservation, cultivation, and conjured heat. Winter by winter, her sorrow became something harder. Spring by spring, her mind sharpened. At 16, she animated her first construct, a brass hawk with onyx eyes that flew the upper battlements and returned with weather reports scratched onto thin parchment slips. At 17, she transmuted rotten stores into usable charcoal and learned how to draw lightning through crystal spires into storage cells beneath the tower. At 18, she began corresponding, secretly, with the outside world, though none knew from whom the messages came. Travelers met hooded strangers on the roads who received coins, medicines, or warnings. Oppressed villages near the old border found their cruel tax ledgers burned overnight, their granaries protected by unseen wards, their children waking to find warm boots by the hearth. The old wizard's habits had become hers. At 19, she learned the truth of Prince Hadrian from spies made of glass moths and whispering smoke. Cruel as Garin had promised, and worse. He hunted servants for sport in his youth, then women once he was old enough to avoid consequence. He delighted in public punishment, wore civility like jewelry, decorative, expensive, and entirely external. When his father died of a seizure at a feast, Hadrian became king and smiled at the funeral pyre. At 20, Roselia scried the capital she had lost. She saw her father's throne melted and recast into a Varethian war monument, saw statues of her mother torn down and replaced with King Hadrian's likeness. She saw Garin Vale, older now and Lord Marshal of the occupied realm, carrying his honors heavily as if every chain of office bit the flesh beneath. Did he regret? Perhaps, but it did not absolve him, not in her eyes. At 21, she no longer resembled the child shoved through the Blackglass Tower's doors. Her face had grown finer and fairer, her gaze steady and steel. She wore dark blue robes worked with silver sigils that shifted when viewed from the corner of the eye. Her hands bore ink stains, calluses, and the faint glow that comes to mages who have channeled too much power too often to remain wholly ordinary. Her voice, when she chose to use it, could calm a frightened animal, freeze a liar into silence, or reduce stone to sand. And beneath all of it lived a wound, cauterized in flame. So when the tower whispered that riders approached, she was ready. They came in state. King Hadrian of Verethus rode at the center beneath a canopy of black and red silk, gold mail gleaming beneath his blood-red cloak. He was handsome in the polished way venomous things are sometimes beautiful. Pale eyes, fine features, an easy mouth made ugly by the certainty that all before it would submit. At his right rode Garin Vale. Age had grayed the general's temples and drawn lines around his eyes, but he still sat a horse like a man born in armor. He looked up at the tower with no triumph in him. Good, Rosalia thought. Let there be dread. They'll come to know it as the proper response. An escort of 60 soldiers ringed them, banners snapping in the cold wind. The king raised his voice at the gate. Princess Rosalia of Aurelian, by decree of crown and treaty, we have come to escort you to your wedding and rightful place beside your sovereign husband. The words echoed against stone. Rosalia stood on the highest balcony, unseen behind a veil of spell glass. A dozen answers rose in her, many of which were dripping with venom, frozen as ice or immolated in flame. She chose silence instead, the promise of such things typically proving the more unnerving. Hadrian smiled thinly. Perhaps the curse has eaten her. Garin's jaw tightened. She lives. How do you know? The old soldier did not answer. Hadrian gestured impatiently. Open it. 2 men approached the gate. The first touched the iron ring. He burst into blue flame without even time to scream, his ashes already blowing away in the eerie wind that began to rise. The second stumbled back, shouting, as the stones beneath him opened like jaws and swallowed him into darkness. The ground closed again with a wet crunch from far below. The soldiers recoiled. Hadrian's horse reared. What is this? Then Rosalia let the glamour fall. She appeared on the balcony above them, framed in the tower's black arch like a figure cut from stormlight. Wind lifted her sleeves as silver runes glimmered along the stone around her. The army went still. Garin looked up, and for one naked instant, Rosalia saw the pure fear of the child he had betrayed reflected in his face. Princess, he said. No, Rosalia replied, and her voice carried unnaturally clearly to every man below. You forfeited the right to call me that when you dragged me here. Hadrian recovered first. He gave her an appraising look that crawled over her skin, making her will herself to not simply evaporate this man and the horse he rode in on, because horses deserved better. Well, the tower has preserved you nicely. Rosalia's expression did not change. You have kept the king waiting, he said. Come down and I may yet forgive your insolence. The air grew colder. Forgive, she repeated it, frigid as that same air. He spread his hands. You are a conquered princess with a useful claim. I am offering you luxury, survival, and children who will sit united upon 2 thrones. Refuse me, and I can still take what I came for. Garin turned sharply behind him. Your Majesty, be silent! Hadrian snapped. Then he looked back up at Rosalia and smiled. Do you know what they told me of this place? That if the curse failed, you would eventually break. That loneliness would make you obedient. Rosalia stepped onto the empty air beyond the balcony and descended as though walking invisible stairs, causing gasps to ripple through the soldiers. When she touched the ground before them, the frost around her boots webbed out in pale lines. No, she said. It made me dangerous.
Hadrian's hand went to his sword. "Seize her!" No one moved, because the shadows behind them had risen. Brass constructs unfolded from hidden trenches beneath the slope, tall as knights, faceless, rune-lit, bearing halberds of humming crystal. From the battlements poured flocks of glass ravens with razored wings. Wards ignited in circles around the army, hemming them in with walls of pale fire. Naturally, panic spread instantly. Men shouted and horses screamed and reared. Rosalia's gaze never left the king. "You murdered my family," she said. "You ravaged my country. You intended to drag me from this place like a trophy and force my body to sanctify your theft." Hadrian drew steel. "I am king!" "You are carrion draped in silk," she spat, utterly disgusted. He lunged. He was fast, faster than court gossips and drunken lords would have believed. But Rosalia had spent 7 years practicing against traps designed by a grieving genius who mistrusted complacency more than poison. With a mere flick of her wrist, the king's formidable masterwork blade dissolved into red dust. He staggered, staring at the hilt in shocked disbelief. Then the earth seized his legs up to the knee. He shouted, struggling, face twisting with sudden animal fear. Garin had drawn his blade too, but not toward her, rather toward his own king's guard, who were raising crossbows. "Hold!" the general roared. "Hold, damn you!" Some listened, but most fired anyway. The bolts never reached her. They stopped mid-air, hung trembling, then reversed and drove themselves into the ground at their owner's feet. Rosalia looked at Garin. "And you," she said quietly. The old soldier lowered his sword. "I know," he said. Perhaps he had rehearsed pleas, perhaps apologies, perhaps explanations about impossible choices and lesser evils, and the lives he had thought to save. In the end, he offered none. "I know," he repeated. Something in her almost hated him more for that. "Did you believe I would die here?" she asked. He answered after a long pause. "I hoped you might live long enough to hate me." "Why?" "Because hatred keeps you alive," he said. "And here you stand." It was the nearest thing to remorse he had in him. Hadrian was still screaming threats, promises of torture, armies, retribution. Flecks of spittle shone on his lips. Rosalia turned toward him, unmoved and unimpressed. This was it. The moment she'd waited years for, dreamed of annihilating utterly for stealing her life and family away. She wanted him to die horribly in terror and agony. And now here he was, utterly impotent and powerless, precisely where she wanted him to be. But Corvin's last warning rose in her mind. "Do not surrender your heart to vengeance without asking what it will cost you." Justice or wrath, the difference mattered. Hadrian deserved it, not simply for her, but for every life he'd taken and ruined without regret, reprisal, or restitution. Garin deserved it, penitent intention meaningless in the face of traitorous action. Slowly, she lifted her hand. The ground released Hadrian to the waist. Hope flared in his eyes. Then she showed him the orb. Corvin's crystal, now set within a scepter of black wood and silver, phasing into her grasp. "I could kill you in 100 ways," she said, her fury strained to be set free. "I could make your blood boil in your veins. I could unravel your mind. I could hang your soul at this tower's gate until crows forgot your name." Hadrian paled, utter hopeless fear radiating from him, a restrained stalk of wheat trembling helplessly in the breeze while awaiting the reaper's scythe. "But dead monsters become martyrs to fools. Living ones can be made into lessons." She touched the orb to the air. Light burst outward in a ring that swept across the army and raced south, faster than wind. In the capital, in every occupied town, in every manor where collaborators dined fat beneath stolen roofs, mirrors and polished metal and still water suddenly awakened. And all across the conquered realm people saw. They saw Hadrian on his knees in the mud, stripped of grandeur. They heard his own voice, drawn from records Rosalia had collected, confessing cruelties he had laughed about in private. They saw lists of bribes, murders, land seizures, the names of those who had served him. They saw the truth. When the light faded,
Silence hung over the hill. Roselia looked again at Garin Vale. "As for you," she said, "death would also be too easy." He did not flinch. "I sentence you to live," she said, "and to spend what remains of that life tearing down what you helped build." Garin closed his eyes once, briefly. "Yes." "If you refuse, I will know, and death will be a mercy." "I know." She nodded once, then she raised both hands. The walls of pale fire opened, but only to the east, toward the capital. "Go," she said to the soldiers. "Carry your pathetic king home. Tell them the Lioness of Aurelian lives." No one argued. Men rushed to free Hadrian, most of them not meeting her gaze. In the eyes of those who did, Roselia saw not merely fear, but something more useful. Belief, awe, majesty. The procession that had come to claim a bride fled instead with a disgraced king and a sentence hanging over half a nation. Garin was the last to leave. At the edge of the hill, he turned once in the saddle. "I am sorry," he said. "Truly." It was far too small a thing for what he had done, but true regardless, as he said. Roselia watched them all ride away, vengeful hunger still clawing at her, but never consuming her. The wars that followed were not won in a day. No story worthy of truth ends so neatly. There were battles, sieges, assassins sent against Roselia, and lords who bent the knee only when shown that their alternatives were ruin. Villages rose in rebellion. Old banners were pulled from hiding places beneath floorboards and brought back into the light. Garin Vale kept his word and broke 3 regiments loyal to Hadrian before dying a year later, with Aurelian's colors in his hands. Roselia accepted his debt paid in her heart, remembering who he was before his betrayal, and who he became after reaffirming his loyalty. King Hadrian lived long enough to see himself and his empire break. His allies defeated or fled, his enemies pouncing upon him. He was reduced to a cornered beast of haggard visage, desperately clinging to the ruined castle and meager parcel of land he had left, his eyes wide with all-consuming paranoia, barking insane commands and even going so far as to kill his own soldiers, whom he deemed insubordinate. The death blow was dealt by Roselia herself in the heat of the last fierce battle, the cruel king's end taking the form of a raging blue fire that reduced Hadrian and everything within 10 feet around him to bare ash and dirt. Despite her hate for the king, it was a mercifully quick death she extended to him and the inexplicably loyal retinue still surrounding him, in order to finally and decisively end this long and difficult chapter in both her life and her country's history. Not vengeance, but justice. As for Roselia, called by some the Tower Queen, by others the Blackglass Sorceress, she rebuilt what had been broken as best she could, and never alone. She would remember Corvin's wish, life, love, and all that comes with them, and eventually allow herself those things too, as she tried to give them to her people. But that would all come in time. She had her whole life ahead of her for such things. What mattered first was this. A girl abandoned in a place of grief had found not a curse, but an inheritance. Not despair, but instruction. Not loneliness, but solitude. Not death, but the means to become powerful enough that evil would remember her name and tread lightly around it. And on clear nights, when the observatory windows caught the moon just so, the crystal orb on her staff, inserted into its pedestal, sometimes glimmered with pale gold light. At times like this, Roselia remembered the old wizard fondly, and believed he and his family approved, wherever they were, reunited and happy. Because challenges, after all, were meant to be overcome, and she had become something better. And there you have it, my friends. A wonderful story, truly. Once again, I thank you for your time, and I hope that you come back soon to hear another story of another world out there in the vast and limitless multiverse. Until next time, my friends, stay safe and sane.